10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 44. Hey everybody, and welcome back to episode 44. We're really getting up there on the episode count, which makes me very happy. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who has been listening to the podcast and supporting it throughout these 44 weeks that we've been putting out episodes. Hope you're still finding it beneficial, but we really couldn't do this without you. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out to all of our listeners. And thank you for checking out the show each and every week. So a few housekeeping things before we jump into the episode. Make sure you go and get the PDF for this episode at 10minutejazzlesson.com. That's the number 10minutejazzlesson.com. And I've been hearing from more and more people every week with questions. And make sure you send me those questions. And if you have ideas for a show, I love to base my shows off of actual real life questions that people have for me. So make sure you reach out, drop me a line, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. And also, if you have 2 minutes, we would really appreciate it if you hopped onto iTunes and left us a 5-star rating and review. That really helps us out and doesn't take very much on your side of things. And we really appreciate all the people that have gone on and done that. It really makes a big difference for us in terms of getting out to more and more people that can find this podcast useful. All right, let's jump into today's show. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite tunes by one of my favorite composers that has a very unique chord structure at the end of it. And this tune is Ladybird by the great Dameron. Not to be confused with Lazy Bird by Coltrane. This is a completely different tune. So let's start by talking about the form of the tune and kind of how it works. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the two measures that we want to work on. So we'll start out mentioning that it is a 16-bar form. It's in the key of C major concert. And it's a nice short little tune that doesn't have all that much to it. But we do see a lot of 2-5-1 progressions. And one of the coolest things is that we have this awesome deceptive cadence in measure 3 and 4. So we have a 2-5 that looks like it's going to go to the key of E flat major, but it actually goes back to the key of C major. So that's something to note. And then we see a lot of 2-measure 2-5-1 progressions that don't always go to 1. So this is a good tune to work on where things are a little bit unexpected. But before I get too far down that rabbit hole, let's actually talk about the part that we want to focus on today. And that's the last 2 measures of the tune. We see this really interesting turnaround that leads us back into the top of the tune in the last 2 measures, so measures 15 and 16. So let's take a look at it, and this progression will be on your worksheet for this week, so take a look at it. So we see the chords C major 7, followed by E flat major 7, followed by A flat major 7, followed by D flat major 7. Now, a lot of real books and some lead sheets will have one major 7 chord followed by a dominant chord, but I like to play them all as major chords, and that's just kind of the way that I learned the tune. That's the way I've been playing over it for years, so that's kind of the way that I'm going to teach it to you. So let's talk about how this progression works, because it's not your typical 2-5-1 or your 3-6-2-5-1, but it is in fact based on that progression. So what Dameron did was he took a typical 1-6-2-5 progression, and instead of doing that traditional turnaround, he took everything up by a tritone, everything but the first chord. So let's think about what a typical 1-6-2-5 progression would be in the key of C. It would be C, followed by A, followed by D, followed by G. So C, A, D, G, okay? Now we look at the chord progression that we've just talked about, where it's actually C, E flat, A flat, D flat. And what we realize is after the C chord, he basically took the traditional 1-6-2-5 progression and put everything up by a tritone. So C remains the same. It starts off exactly the same with a C chord. But then, instead of going to an A chord, he went up a tritone. So up a tritone from an A chord is an E flat chord. Then instead of the D chord, he went up a tritone to A flat. And finally, instead of the G chord, he went up a tritone to D flat. So it's still functioning, reasonably well as this 1-6-2-5, but he really shifts the whole focus to a different key. And the reason for doing this, and also the reason why the tritone substitution is such an effective thing, is that if we substitute the final dominant chord, so what would have been a G7 chord before the C7 chord, and instead we replace it with a D flat chord, we get the half step movement into the C chord. So he basically took that concept and elongated it for the 6 chord and the 2 chord as well as the 5 chord. Now I know I've just said a lot, but basically what you need to know is what is a traditional 1-6-2-5 progression, and then be able to transpose that up a tritone, and you get the Tad Dameron turnaround at the end of Ladybird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop on piano, I'm going to play a traditional 1-6-2-5-1 progression. Then I'm going to play it the way that Tad Dameron wrote it in Ladybird so that you can hear the difference. So the first thing that you will hear is the 1-6-2-5, and then the second thing that you will hear is the actual turnaround at the end of Ladybird with everything transposed up a tritone. Check it out. So for my money, that Tad Dameron turnaround is just so cool, and it's probably my favorite part of this tune, but one that is kind of difficult to play over because we work on our 1-6-2-5s, but we have never really worked on until we encounter this tune, this particular progression where everything is up by a tritone. So let's go over some basic stuff that you can do to work on it. The coolest thing about this progression is that it sounds good when you're playing very basic stuff over it. Tad Dameron did all the hard work for us. He wrote this awesome turnaround, and we just need to accurately play over it. We don't need to do anything super fancy. It's going to sound good if we just play some very, very basic stuff, because the interesting part is really in the chords. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this will be this will be exercise number 1 on your exercise sheet for this week, is just going to be playing 1, 2, 3, 5 over each of the chords. And this will really familiarize you with everything, get you into the scales over each one of those chords. And it sounds great. I've actually played this in many, many solos, and it sounds awesome every time. So here's what exercise number 1 sounds like over the turnaround to Ladybird. So one of the telling things about that line is I don't even need a play along, right? You can really hear the chord progression because I'm outlining it so clearly that it's going to be a great exercise for you to get used to over those last 2 bars. You can clearly hear the progression without me even having anything going on in the back of it. So let's take another one. Let's take a more vertical one. That was a more scale-based one. Let's simply just arpeggiate the chords. We'll actually start from the root every time on this one. So I'm just going up 1, 3, 5, 7 on each chord. Here's that one, exercise number 2. So you can hear that one's a little bit less melodic, but still gets the job done. If you were to play that, it would still sound great. Now, the real kind of gold when you're working on the chords is if you can mix up which note you start on. So on that one, I started on the root every time. What you really want to go for is you really want to go for good voice leading, which means whatever I leave off on one chord, I'm free to start on the next chord tone that makes sense on the next chord. So what you really want to work on is being able to start your arpeggios from every single chord tone in all 4 of those chords, and that's where it's really going to shine. So let me do a couple of examples where I'm utilizing good voice leading, and I'm going to write a few of these out for you so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So this is just chord tones 1, 3, 5, and 7, but I'm going to utilize good voice leading on this. So you can hear that's where the real gold comes in, is when you're super comfortable with these chords, there's no limit to what you can do over them. Even just using something as simple as just chord tones, you can really play a lot of material that's going to sound awesome over the top of this chord progression. All right, we went a little bit long today, but that's all right. We really wanted to get into that, chord progression at the end of Ladybird. Shoot me any questions that you might have. Really, really study the examples this week, because this is such a fun tune to play if you know what you're doing at the end there. And I really do think that those last 2 bars are the most difficult part of this entire tune. So you really want to know how to handle that, and you really want to be able to, get your stuff together over those last 2 bars. And a little bit of work on this will go a long way. So make sure that you put the time and the effort in, and you're going to sound great over this tune. This is a tune that people really love to call at jam sessions and standard gigs. Definitely one of my favorite tunes. And like I said, check out all of Tad Dameron's music, because he's just one of the most amazing composers that there ever was in jazz history. Everybody played his tunes, so he would be a really good person to get familiar with and master some of his music. It'll come in really handy for you. Okay, so that'll do it for this week. We'll see you all next week with another episode. Make sure you go and grab the PDF. Make sure that you go to the website, check out everything we have to offer. And if you have a minute, we would really, really appreciate a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out so much. I know I beat that like a dead horse, but it's one of the hugest things. It's the way that iTunes really calculates which podcasts they're going to promote and which ones they aren't. So we would really appreciate that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the podcast with a little bit of myself playing over Ladybird. Since the episode went so long, I didn't get a chance to do that, but really listen to the last 2 bars on the stuff that I'm going to include at the end here. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast.
Thank you.